Hello, I am Mudita, and welcome back to Satisfactory. We are getting so close to 1.0, and I am excited. So after finishing the last playthrough, I decided to take a couple days off and not log into Satisfactory. I had some fun with Shapes too. If you've played it, let me know. I had a lot of fun playing through it, and I could see myself going through another playthrough or two. If you haven't played Shapes, it's a great game. You get to start off with the really basics, just a square and a circle. You get to cut them, rotate them, stack them together. Later on, you get to extract paints. Then you get to paint all of your different shapes, which obviously adds some more complexity. And then you get to play with some trains. You get to mix the paints together. You get to create crystals. For being a very basic game, I highly recommend it. It was very satisfying to play, and I loved the soundtrack. But it's definitely not going to replace Satisfactory for me. So in the last playthrough, I had a pretty obvious theme of doing a very modular world, and very vertical. So I had towers everywhere, and each one was basically either just making the ingots, or making all the way up to a certain product and then shipping it over. But in general, it was a very modular world. The other theme was obviously load balancing. So that one is going to stay. I really enjoy load balancing. I think it's a lot of fun. It's a challenging, different way to play the game. I definitely know why a lot of people don't choose it, and if you prefer manifolds, more power to you. I have a lot of hours in the game, and this was just kind of a fun way to switch things up for me. I'm a weirdo, and the math is oddly fun. But I know one of the big complaints is that load balancing takes up just a lot of space. And in the last playthrough, I kind of let it. I didn't really try to make things super compact. I really enjoy being able to see all the parts moving around. And so if I space things way too close, then it's just kind of hard to tell. And if they're too small, then I'm just really bad at finding where my errors are when I do make them. But in this save, we're going to do things a little bit differently. I want to make my load balancing much more compact. And the reason for that is I'm not going to do modular. I'm not going to do one mega factory. But instead, I'm going to do a couple probably spread out, across the four corners of the world sort of a thing. So in one biome, I'm just going to have a massive mega factory, and, a biome or two over, I'll probably put another one. And then I'll use some trains to transport things back and forth between the two. But I want to try my hand at doing a much bigger singular factory instead of a whole bunch of towers. Since we're getting so close, I figured this is a great time to do some blueprint preparation work. Welcome back to the Dune Desert. So, a lot less busy than the last time I was out here, but that is because I created a new save. So my 1.0 blueprint prep, somehow I've already spent almost 9 hours in here, just messing around with blueprints. So it is basically a creative world with everything unlocked and no building costs and all that jazz. Because all I'm doing here is creating some blueprints. And as you can see, I've made a few. So this video is going to focus on the machines, but I have made some new train blueprints, the foundations. Well, some of them are interesting. I've got a bunch of different walls over here. I've created some new belt bus ideas, and then I've got some really random ones that I'll probably add to, and some I'll probably never even use. It's just kind of the way it works. So let's start with the basics. Let's go through the smelters and the constructors, since they have one input, one output. These were by far the easiest to do. With the smelters and constructors, really simple, since we're starting with the two-way split. So my goal with all of these is I want to bring things in as close as possible and avoid any egregious clipping. So two constructors, really simple. The smelters, because they are a little bit thinner, you can't put the splitter and the merger directly in the center, because then it just doesn't really work. So I have an A and a B, and the reason they aren't the opposite way is if these were this way, you wouldn't be able to easily join these, or you just have to have them offset. So it really is kind of a preference thing. I'd rather be able to put this closer together if I wanted to merge them like that. Now, the idea with this playthrough is I want to make things as compact as possible. So this is more of just kind of a footprint for the later blueprints. With the three-way split, still pretty simple. But here's where I made kind of a preference thing. You can actually move this 1 meter closer. You won't be able to see the belt at all. Let me show you. So I have mine set up at this distance right here. You can set it into here. It would still make the right turn into the other constructors, and you can place a belt here. The reason I don't like setting it up like this is I would have to load up this blueprint and change it anytime I needed to change this belt speed. So it's not a lot, but there are definitely recipes that are going to require more than a Mark 1 belt, and there's like I don't even know if you can select it without deleting this, replacing the belt at the correct speed. So that's the reason I don't like setting things that close together, even though it will work. There's really nothing wrong with it. But if I ever need to change it or mess with it in any way, I just prefer to not have to mess with it like that. So that's why I move it out that 1 meter, even though you could make this essentially 2 meters more compact than the way I have it. Definitely a preference thing. Same thing with the smelters. It's just got that small 1 meter gap, but that's at least enough to be able to change. Although with smelters you could definitely make it more compact because every single recipe is going to be a Mark 1 belt, unless you're overclocking. Constructors, however, definitely have recipes where you would need to change a belt speed. Starting with the 4 machines is where the load balancing gets a little bit more fun. So if we look at the smelters, the idea with this is I wanted to keep it as compact as possible. In the last playthrough, I would have done both merging or splitting the same way, where it just kind of stacks out farther and farther, and I like the way that it looks. You get to see everything on a flat surface, but it can end up taking up quite a bit of space the bigger and bigger this system is. So if I keep all of the mergers and the splitters in a line, I can actually just attach a lift. And even though you do have to manipulate it to be the shorter lift, I can keep everything basically in a row, and it only has to come out 2 meters on each side. And I did the same thing with the constructors. So instead of the splitter being out here and it plugging into there, we're just going to plug in right here. So let me show you real quickly how to manipulate these lifts. If I have my splitter here, and I want to recreate that exact thing, all I need to do is grab myself the stackable conveyor pull, make sure it's lined up in line with the edge of the splitter, grab your lift, and you should be able to do this either way, but the lifts are kind of finicky, and so you can connect it to the actual splitter, and then, yeah, see, sometimes it just won't attach for whatever reason. So in that case, all I need to do is connect this to the stackable conveyor pull, bring it down, hit R, and there we go. And then make sure that you delete this. When you're bringing in the conveyor, you want to make sure that you're connecting it to the lift and not the stackable conveyor pull. Now, if you need to go the opposite direction, the easiest way to do this is you need 3 meters. So if you line this up with the edge of the splitter, go back 1, 2, 3. I can grab myself the lift. If I place it here, spin it around, and it'll connect right in. And then I can just delete that, and there I go. With 5 machines, I've got a couple different layouts. With smelters, because they're so small, I'm able to put this all on one floor, which is pretty awesome. The layout does get a little bit busy, but I do keep it in a pretty compact amount of space, in my opinion. So this is completely load balanced, and I have an example right here. Here's the 5-way split that I'm using on pretty much all of these machines. There is another way that gets around the limitation that is on this middle belt right here, but for the most part, I rarely run into needing that. And this is a little bit smaller of a setup, and since I am going to be fighting for space here in a little bit, this is going to be the one that I'm going with. So we've got a merger that goes into a splitter. This splitter splits twice. This one has 1/5 to 3/5. The other splitter has our 4th and 5th. To make sure that these are all equal amounts, we need to split this all 3 ways like we are on this side, and cycle this back to that merger. So this belt is going to be carrying 20% more than what your initial belt is carrying. So keep that in mind. So the way this little monstrosity works is this very top one right here is that initial merger. This merger then gets fed into a splitter, which is this second one down. That splitter then gets split twice, so we've got one here, one here. So one of these has the three-way split right here, so this feeds these first three. This one feeds that one, and then the last output comes up here and back into that initial merger. Now with constructors, we have to go vertical. The way this is all working is exactly the same. So here's the initial merger that's leading into that first splitter. That splitter gets split twice, so one goes here, one comes out here and up to this. We've got the three machines on the bottom, the two up here. The cycle back part is this piece right here that comes down and goes into the initial merger. So in the last playthrough, I had to split up the 5 constructor blueprint into 2, and it was kind of annoying. You had to connect only 2 belts, but still, it was something that you needed to remember to do. This is much simpler, having only 1 blueprint. However, I do have an A and a B component, and I'll show you why. Here we have the A, and here's B. The exact same thing, it's just a mirrored setup. And in the beginning, when I mentioned I played Shapes, one of the great quality of life things that Shapes 2 has is the ability to just hit F when you have a blueprint selected, and it would just mirror the entire thing. If I could have done that, I wouldn't have to rebuild the whole thing. But I say that not being a programmer or developer and having no clue how hard that would be for Satisfactory to do. But it would be nice. But that's what this is, and the reason for it is now there aren't lifts in the way when I want to connect these things. If I was going to connect more of these, if I needed 20, then I would stack it up to here and I would place some temporary foundations and manipulate that belt. But since I don't, for this example, I can just place it at the very top, because then I don't have to manipulate the belt at all. Place it straight in, and then from here, this needs to be a splitter. And there we go. And then pretty easily you could just drag this down and have your initial belt come in. And that's 10 constructors, completely load balanced in a fairly compact space. Now we're up to 6 machines. So here's a really simple 6-way split. And this is how I did it with the machines. So I did it same thing, as compact as possible, which meant clipping in some of the foundations into each other to get it as tight as possible. I don't know if that's something that I'm going to keep, but for now I like the idea of keeping it as compact as possible. So the initial amount is going to get plugged in right to the side, and as you can guess, there's a second one that has a mirrored layout so that you can easily place them next to each other and join them up. But the initial amount goes into here, splits half down to the bottom 3, the other half goes up to the top 3. Really pretty simple. Same thing with constructors, it's laid out the exact same way, and then there's 2 of them so you can join them together to make 12 or 24. I decided to skip the 7-way split because even though you can do a very similar thing to the 5-way where you split it basically 8 ways and then you would cycle back the 8th one into a merger into the very beginning, but having load balance an entire playthrough, I don't know if I used the 7-way split more than once. If at all. I'm really trying to remember if I used it, because to be completely honest, it is so much easier to just place 8 machines and then mess with the clock speed. And so an 8-way split is pretty simple. Powers of 2 and 3 are really simple, so you split it in half, that splits in half, and then that splits in half, and we've got our 8. So here's our initial splitter. That gets cut in half, so from this splitter we go into this one, which splits into these 2. Also goes into these 2, but then that very first splitter splits in half up to here, and then same thing, splits in half, and we've got our 8. And there's an A and a B, just like the other ones, so that you could join these up and very quickly have 16. And here we have the constructors. It's the exact same setup, because with them both being single inputs, it's really pretty simple. Just getting all the spacing right so it all kind of fits in the most compact possible area is the tricky part, but hey, that's what blueprints are for, is now, once I've made them, I can spam them down and save myself a whole bunch of time, effort, and space. Alright, and lastly, foundries and assemblers. So these are the last ones I'm going to cover in this video, and there won't be quite as many different blueprints. So to get these as compact as possible, both the foundries and the assemblers run into the same problem, where if you have two machines next to each other, a splitter directly in the middle isn't really going to easily split between those two closest belts. So you're going to have to offset it and pick one side or the other. So I have two different layouts, and then that way you can easily join the two. If you have them the opposite way, it runs into the same problem where they're too close and you won't be able to get right angles. And the assemblers are set up the same way. And then if we move on to 3 machine setups, these are really simple because we get to just place one splitter right in front of each of the inputs for one of the assemblers, and then we just need to create a short lift to be able to get it to the right height and go into the splitter. So like earlier, it's really pretty simple. If you have the machine and you want to place a short lift on that one right there. So with this one, the input isn't flush with the edge of the machine. I basically go from the edge of the machine and I go back 2. But this will work at different distances. For example, I can place it that close, and if I attach it to the lift here, if I hit R so it's facing the right direction, it'll let me snap into the machine. Now that right there is what I'm not crazy about. This will work. I just don't like the look of it. So even though I could make it a little bit more compact, I'd rather go from this distance, because then you don't have the accordion sticking out through the machine at all. It's pretty flush, and I think it looks good. So I just have 2 different setups so that you can have them on opposite directions. If you wanted to have the splits go this way, then you would place it here, but you can do the same thing as before, and we can actually put them in the center. And this will work for basically any of these. And the nice thing with these is I don't need to mess around with short lifts. So if I take the bottom one and I just place it right here, the second one right there, same with these, just snap it straight in, these will directly connect and it will be nice right angles. And there we go. It's essentially only taking up 2 more meters of space than a manifold would. Since the foundries are set up the same way, you can do it the exact same. Now for the last one that I blueprinted was the 5-way split. Because with a 2, you can easily make any multiples of 2s really easily. Same thing with 3s. I could easily make any amount in quantities of 3. So a 5-way split is the last one that I can see myself using quite a bit, and it will come in handy. So this complicated madness is how I got a 5-way split to work with having 2 inputs. Yeah, I know, load balancing is going to get pretty interesting in this playthrough. But the concept is the exact same as all the rest of them. We just have 2 different inputs to deal with. How hard can it be? So the major difference that I went with is I have the 3 machines on the bottom because that just feels right. With the 2 machines on top, I had extra space. So the initial mergers where everything is getting plugged up to are up here. And this was the easiest way I could get it all to fit in the smallest amount of space. So instead of them being at the bottom level, which is where I would almost always put them, they're up here. So these mergers then go into these 2 lifts. These lifts go into this splitter and this splitter. So those are the initial splitters. Each of these then need to split twice. So one half of it is going onto this floor, feeding these 3 machines. The other half is going up to this floor, feeding these 2 machines, and then cycling back to the initial merger. For the other one, it's doing the same thing. It's going straight down into a merger here, these 3 machines. The other part is going to this lift and up here, feeding those machines and going into that merger. So it looks super chaotic, but it's not that bad. I haven't really talked about it, but merging everything up is always much simpler because now it's down to 1 input. So we just grab those 2, send them over into a merger. These 3 then get combined and come up to here and into this merger. And since this is like all of the rest of them, there's an A and a B, so you can easily join two of them together. So that's why it's pointing inwards, is then the other one would be pointing inwards. You just slap one more merger right down in the middle, and there you go. You have the output of 10 assemblers in a 4x8 grid. The main difference with the Foundries is they're quite a bit shorter than assemblers, and so I was actually able to cut off a half of a foundation. Whether that's really a big deal in the long run, I don't know. I may end up just letting it take up the full foundation, because it just may make things a little bit easier or look more uniform in the factory. But for now, I made all of these basically as compact as possible. So hopefully this inspires you to make some of your own blueprints, but if you do want to use these or edit them in any way and use them, they are all available for free in the Google Drive down in the description. I'll probably make another video going over some of the walls that I've made and, some of the belt buses and stuff that I plan on using in the next save, maybe even my new train blueprints. So look forward to that, and thanks for watching.